Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Young Life Podcast, episode 12. Today, we are joined by...
Aiden. I am Aiden, and I am a Bible college student as well as a small group host with the one and only Ben Walker. He's right here on Sunday nights, happening at 7:30.
There you go. My name's Elliot. I host the Open Contest Podcast every Tuesday at 10 a.m.
I'm Ben. I'm a Bible college student, TYL leader, and also lead the small group with Aiden.
Ben hasn't been on the podcast in a while, and I really think it's because every time he comes on, I remind all the ladies that he's very available. That's
That is exactly why.
Okay, this week we don't have a TYL download because if you watched last week's episode, I had to record the message in my basement here because I lost the file. Anyway, and I meant to edit it, but I forgot to edit it. And so it was just so embarrassing we're not doing one this week. But if you want to go watch my screw up, it is last week. And Caleb Bourne felt the need to text me the time code, and it's at 12:11. So if you're really interested, it's over there. You can go check it out. But this week we are talking about sharing our faith. And last week we had Laura Fest on talking about how to love people in the middle of a pandemic. And while our situation is not ideal, or what we would say is ideal, how do we still remain effective in people who kind of pursue the mission that Jesus has asked us to partner with him on. And so when we go down that road of being involved in people's lives, eventually we're going to get to the point where we have an opportunity to speak into their life the truth of the gospel and the truth of the goodness of who Jesus is. And so we want to talk about that tonight and begin to talk about that conversation. So I want to know from you guys, who is the person or persons or situation, whatever it is, that introduced you to Jesus, introduced you to faith for the first time? And when did you come to faith? Two-part question. Who was it? When was it?
Well, for me, I grew up in a Christian home, but I think when I kind of started taking things more seriously and developed an understanding for what I believed was in kids church. Definitely, we had a really good kids program, and ever since then, just getting connected and learning the basics of what it means to follow Jesus. I just kind of I took that from there, and I've been following him ever since.
You've blossomed into this young man. Look at that. Amazing.
Yeah.
Ben Elliot, what about you guys?
Yeah, no, I think for me, it's the same thing. I grew up in a Christian household, and when I was growing up, we attended Spanish church in Toronto. And then, so yeah, when we came up to Barrie, it was different. And then I knew of my faith from a young age, but actually taking it seriously, that probably really didn't start until after high school. And I probably attribute that to specifically my youth leaders as well. So when I was a part of a youth group, us leaders, I was able to grow in my faith specifically, and then as well keep myself accountable and actually just know what I was actually believing. Because I think it's just to know something, but actually believe what you're believing is an entirely different thing.
Totally.
Yeah. I grew up in a Christian household, but I remember I was probably about 6 years old. And one of my best friends, her dad was a pastor at the church, and we were over at their house for some party or something. And we started talking about accepting Jesus. And that was the moment that I was like, yes, this is actually, I want Jesus for myself. And so I remember
what kind of high school parties were you going to?
It wasn't high school. I was like 6, man.
Oh,
that got so creepy.
Guys, I went to this high school party and I found Jesus.
You want to meet Jesus?
And I keep going. We're paying attention. We're paying attention. Go. 6-year-old.
This is why I don't come on the podcast anymore, Scott.
We need HR for this show.
I knew it.
Toby.
Oh, that's so funny.
Anyway, we prayed in their backyard, and that was probably the first moment that I really decided. I mean, from then, there were obviously different moments, like in high school, deciding and all that, but that was probably the first.
Yeah. And I think my story is similar. Like, I grew up, my dad's pastor. I grew up in a Christian house, but similar to what Elliot's saying, like, there was a moment that it shifted into being something that was actually a personal decision and not just a byproduct of my upbringing, if that makes sense. And the thing that made a difference in my life is there's lots of people who spoke into my life, but it was really the friends that I made in high school that made the difference. Like it was not perfect. I look back at some of the stuff that we still got into, and I'm like, I don't know how my faith grew out of that, but it happened to. And there was something though to, for better, for worse, the group of people who were doing the best of what they knew at the moment. And I feel like in my faith, there's been moments where it becomes like the new flag post moment where it's like, now I'm a follower of Jesus. And then I get to another point in my life. I'm like, I can't believe I thought I was following Jesus then. Now I'm following Jesus. And I think that seems to be sometimes the cycle of being renewed and getting to know him in a new and a deeper way. And, we want to talk about it because Jesus asks us to do two things: to be my witness and to go and make disciples. It's really the two things that is a command to every believer. God's plan for this world did not sit on the shoulders of church leaders that you would bring your friends and loved ones to a building to then hear a professional explain the gospel to them. But the gospel grew and was explosive because everyday people chose to talk about the difference that God had made in their own life. And, when we are in this current circumstance, we need more people who feel the ability to actually share their faith in a way that is meaningful and significant. And I think what kind of gets us caught up sometimes is feeling inadequate to do so. What do you think would be some of the biggest things that make people hesitate, or they're maybe fearful of sharing their faith? Like, what would just be a few things off the top of your head that you're like, this would definitely be something that would make them hesitant, or me hesitant, or them, whatever it might be?
No, I just think that perhaps there's maybe a stigma today around Christianity that we're a bunch of like rule followers and that we like low-key hate everybody for what they believe. And I think that prevents us from actually wanting to make real conversation with people because we're afraid of the rejection that could come with it.
Yeah, totally.
So I think
totally
that's one
agree.
of the biggest factors that go on.
I think it just comes down, I know for me personally, and maybe a lot of other people, it comes down to the how to, like how exactly to do it. How do I, like, what do I say? How do I like start the whole explanation? Like, do I just go up to someone random and share the gospel? Like and I, like we talked about last week, like it kind of starts with like, I feel like a relationship, but like for me personally, I've been so caught up in the execution of like, when is the right time? What are the right words to say? And that's the other thing too. It's like, it's something that we have to say eventually. Like we have to explain it. It's not like, for me, I feel like I've been so comfortable just thinking, oh, they'll see my actions and they'll see the way Jesus wants me to live. So they'll come to me and ask me. But yeah. I think a big part of it is kind of exiting your comfort zone.
Totally it is.
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of people, it's a fear of offending them. Like the gospel in and of itself is offensive. To us as Christians, it's like, it's blessed assurance, right? Yeah. Jesus is mine. But for other people, before you can accept Jesus, you first have to accept I'm broken and I can't fix it on my own. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people, that message in and of itself is offensive. And so we as Christians, we like to be liked. Everyone likes to be liked. So we don't want to say something that's going to offend someone. And so we tend to shy away from it.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we've talked about this Young Life before, but I think the nature of that, what you just explained there, is the cultural narrative that we live in, that you are the master of your own fate. Like you hold the keys to your own future. And we understand the reality is that's not true, even though we live in a culture that believes that's true. It's really the backbone of every marketing you've ever it really plays into the you are the main character of your own life kind of mentality. You know what I mean? And that's what I loved about Laura's conversation last week. And I think Laura's conversation last week is a good groundwork to begin to see how we share our faith, because she kind of postured her life to say, no, I want to be accessible and available. I want to care for people. I want to love people. And from that place of a posture of a servant, I want to share who Jesus is. Because I think that no one cares that you know until they know that you care. And Ben, I think you're totally right that we are cautious of offending. But when people get to know your heart and your intention, and you have a track record with them, I think there's an allowance to be open to what you're saying, because they now know your character and heart. And personally, my own personal conviction is I think the gospel it's like a treasure that you want to bring at the right time. And I think sometimes the evangelism method can be, I'm going to stand in a box in a street corner, I'm going to tell them about Jesus, and how they respond is their responsibility. But I really feel like we as believers need to carry more of a responsibility with how we share Jesus. Because I think you're right, Ben. What we're trying to do is get them to a net zero. And I think right now, as believers, as Christians, we live in a deficit of reputation and relationship and love and care and service. And so it's almost like our love and care can help bring someone's opinion to a zero, at least between us and them. And then we have the opportunity to share Jesus with them. And again, no one cares what you know until they know that you care. And so we've invited Pastor Carlo Rosati. He is a friend of mine. He's amazing. He's one of my all-time favorite people to come and talk. He did not grow up in a Christian home, and yet he found Jesus and felt this call to ministry. And now he's a pastor, discipling others and training other people how to disciple other people. And so really excited to have him come kind of talk about his journey. There's this amazing moment. He got to lead his own dad to Christ right before he passed away. Just really amazing story. Anyway, really excited for it. We're going to skip our Young Life download for this week, and we're going to jump right in with Pastor Carlo Rosati. Why don't you check it out right now? Well, everyone, welcome Pastor Carlo Rosati from Stratford, Ontario. Carlo and I had a chance to work together at Waterdown Community Church in Waterdown with pastors Jason and Carla. And so he is one of our all-time favorite people, Carlo and Maddie, his wife Maddie, who is way better than Carlo, but we wanted to interview Carlo just because he has more free time than she does. And Carlo is someone who didn't necessarily grow up in the church. He doesn't grow up from a faith background. And so I think Carlo has a very unique perspective on what it means to come to faith and what it means to disciple people into being disciple makers and people who want to introduce people to their faith. And, you know, the thing I love about Carlo is not one for pageantry in a lot of things in life, but
what does that even mean?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, he's not one for like the show and flowery language. He's just going to tell you how it is, for better, for worse. And he's going to share things from his heart and from a very grounded and authentic perspective. And so, Carlo, why don't you tell us a bit about your story and your life and how you came to faith, and who were the biggest influences in your life when it came to following Jesus?
I think I always had probably a belief in a higher power, whether at that time I wanted to call it God or not. I wasn't convinced from a young age of atheism, in the sense of that nothing can start something. For my whole life, I was like that. If anything doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense. That nothing can start something. So I would have probably considered myself more agnostic for a majority of my life when I was a kid or a teen. And I had really great friends growing up. I grew up in this neighborhood of complexes. There was like 4 or 5 complexes, and each complex had 12 units. So there was like kids out the wazoo. So I had like 20 best friends around me at all times. And I'm technically an only child between my mom and my dad. I do have a half sister from my dad's previous marriage, and that was even before I was born. And she's awesome. I love her. Her name's Marie. But being an only child, growing up with so many friends, it was awesome. And the neighborhood I lived at, like, you know, some of my best friends were just a bike ride down the street, which I think about kids now and how that's just not an option for them right now. I'm like, man, we had it good. We had it good when we were kids. We were allowed to break laws and get away with anything, and we'd never get in trouble. And I had some great friends that lived a couple blocks down the road from me. And one of my best friends growing up, his name was Tyler, and me and Tyler loved skateboarding. And at that time, I didn't have any other friends that were like passionate about skateboarding and just did it every single day. And so me and him every day from like probably grade 6 or grade 7, we started connecting, and we would skate every day after school all day long. I definitely spent more time at his parents' house than my my parents' house from then on. And yeah, so his family was Christian, and they went to this church in Burlington where I grew up in Ontario called Glad Tidings. It's a pretty awesome church. I love it. It feels like home every time I go there. And they had a skate park that they would wheel out into their parking lot. And maybe if you've been in church for any amount of time now, that was like a phase. Like lots of churches wanted to
Totally,
like,
it was.
there was something about Glad Tidings that did it really, really well. Like I remember there would be like 200 kids that would show up to the junior high program. And it was like all these people, they were like me. They had no interest in going to a church, but they were skateboard everywhere. They would order pizza for it. Like it was unreal. It was awesome. And it was just so good. So Tyler invited me to come to his church to skate, and I just couldn't connect the two. And then I showed up and I was like, what is this? This is crazy. It went beyond all of my understanding and previous experience of church or
totally.
God or Christianity or faith. And so that was kind of the start of it. Long story short, his family kind of took me in like a son. Not that my parents abandoned me by any means, or
it was by choice this time. Yeah,
yeah, but they were like a second family to me for sure. And so I connected with his older brother, Mike. His name's Mike Bronson. Some people watching this maybe will end up knowing who that is. And Mike is like been my best friend since then. I remember it started off with him buying me a chocolate bar at youth group because I had no money, and he bought me a chocolate bar, and I came back every week. And I kid you not, from that first night, I had never missed a youth night. Never missed a youth night, not even once. And they were on Fridays at the time. And now as a youth pastor, never missed a youth night. It's never been a thing. So I've been going to youth for like, I don't know,
youth for like 25 years. Yeah, that's good.
And so Mike was one of those influential people in my life. And he really just did an amazing job at kind of expressing the uniqueness of Christianity amongst all other worldviews. And it really caught my attention. And partially it's because now I understand that Holy Spirit was waking something up in me. But at the time it was, wow, this person isn't like, a Bible thumper, all those words we used back then to explain Christians. And he really took time to listen to me, to meet me in the middle, to meet me where I was at. And we always did it organically. I mean, I honestly, like, I make this joke of how like my salvation story, I would call it a mixed salvation for the amount of times that we spent at McDonald's. Like, and there was a 24-hour McDonald's literally across the street from the church in Burlington. And we used to sit in there till 3-4 in the morning. And I was like 16 years old, and we were allowed to do that. And my parents didn't ask me where I was. I never came home.
It was pre-plan to protect. Yeah, for sure.
I never came home in a cop car, so they never asked any questions. Now it's a whole nother world. But we spent so many nights, like countless nights, thousands of hours we clocked in at McDonald's over, Big Macs, just talking about life, talking about faith, talking about doubt, talking about God and all those kinds of things. So I'm an overflow kid. If anybody here is watching that went to youth group, I know this is for young adults, and you went to a conference when you were in youth group, I'm the kid that gave his life to Jesus on a Friday night. And that's where it kind of clicked. It's the Friday night altar call, the piano's playing, it's emotional. The pastor just yelled for half an hour. Like it was intense. And it got my thoughts rolling. I found myself departing from all these people. And there was like, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 people stuffed in this room. And I went up and found myself up on this balcony, which I shouldn't have been able to get up into, but I was that good. So I had practice.
I was that good.
And I remember
there were stairs and the doors open, but I was that good. Yeah.
I remember looking out over on top of this balcony over at all these other people that were my age that came from all these like backgrounds. They came from all over Ontario, and something clicked in my head and I went, okay, how could God not be real? And thousands of people just like me, but not like me at all, show up for the same reason, even if they don't know what that reason quite was yet. And that's where I think the gospel clicked for the very first time. It's not that I wasn't told or expressed about the good news before, but that's where I made that decision. I remember running down to the altar when they did the altar call, and we're singing some old Hillsong United song, and I'm just like weeping and crying. And then I go back and give Mike a big hug. I was like, I just became a Christian. It was like, it was a mess. And anybody that knows me knows
He's like, here's a chicken nugget. Oh, yeah.
Even though my intro from you is that I'm like this bold guy who like doesn't cut around corners, I'm actually like an emotional mess most of the time. It's just I don't
I didn't say you're a jerk. I just said like you're not making stuff up. You're not
right.
You're not adding to it.
So that's kind of where it was at, is somebody introduced me to faith, meeting me where I was, in a unique scenario at a church parking lot skate park. And I went to in a sense a service, and all the things that I was told over time, the seeds that were planted, they clicked in that moment for me. And
yeah, so there's a few things I hear from your story. First of all, like your overflow part, like people want to see a display of what we're talking about when it comes to faith. And when they can experience an encounter with a living God, even from a balcony, watching it happen, people want to know that it's true beyond just what we can explain. But when we put people in the right position, God's going to reveal himself. I think that's a big thing to remember when we're talking about sharing our faith is, we do have a responsibility to share our faith, but it's really the Holy Spirit is the one that makes the pieces all fit together. And I think what makes us really hesitant sometimes is feeling like we need to know how to fit all the pieces together in someone's life for them to finally make that decision. And I think that's actually a good, intimidating feeling, because it means that we care enough to want to fit the pieces together. But there's a part of it where we have to go, you know what, I'm going to trust the Holy Spirit's going to do that. So number one, there's like this display of God's awesome power that actually made a difference in your decision. And two, the Bronson family was someone who was willing to receive you as you were. Like that, it was a genuine relationship. It's not like they were like, oh, we're going to go find that kid Carlo and win him to Jesus. It was something real. And I think one thing that stops people is the feeling that it can sometimes feel like there needs to be an agenda to a friendship.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was something. That was something that I felt like Mike and that Tyler and that whole family, I didn't feel that at all. Totally. Even though I, over time, understood that there was reason to the conversations that we were having. It wasn't that because they just, and as a pastor, I struggle with this now too, because I'm like, well, of course I want to tell people about Jesus because I want them to, live eternally. I don't want them to go to hell, like all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want to just do that but it's actually because I love that person and I want to be friends with that person. I want to care for that person, irrelevant of what they personally decide. And so I never felt that kind of that pressure to like choose or like to do something that they were telling me to do. It was very genuine. Very, very genuine.
And we had Laura Fess on last week. She was talking about loving people in a pandemic. And while we're stuck at home, to see our direct neighbors as that was our community right now, right? Like the people who literally live next door, they're our only really community while we're kind of stuck at home. And a big part of it was making ourselves available. And it sounds exactly what that family did. Like more than anything else, they kind of made their lives available to you. I can see Moose in the background. Like they made themselves available to you. And I think that's a big part for us is as believers, when we make our lives available to other people and in a real and genuine way, and God begins to use those moments that they don't have to be disingenuous, even though, like there are lots of people in my life I wish they would come to faith, but it's not the only reason that I have a relationship with them. Of course, I feel like I want to share this amazing thing with them, but it can't necessarily be the only motive because then it feels like it feels disingenuous. And I feel like it robs the gospel of what it really means to want to care and show love and grace. God doesn't love me with an alternative motive. He just loves me for who I am. And so I feel like the charge to us is to try and do that for other people as well.
Yeah. Something that we used to talk about a lot when we were in Waterdown together is, the kind of like the slogan of the church was your place to belong. And it was written all over the place. It was ingrained in our minds, right? And the way that we live today, I think, is because of what we learned in that season. And I feel like that is definitely a part of my story, is that I felt like I belonged before I had to believe. So I didn't have to, pass a test before I was accepted by the people that were teaching me about Christianity. And that was huge. That was huge, that they truly just wanted me to know that I belonged before I even believed, which really goes to show about somebody's character and motives behind why they even spend time with you.
Totally. And so as someone who comes from outside of the church in a lot of ways, what were kind of the things that made you initially hesitant? Like, what are the things that from the outside looking in, you're like, well, I don't think I want to go to your church. I've heard this about Christians. What are some of the things that made you a little bit hesitant as you were considering faith?
Yeah. There wasn't anything that was heavy. Like I didn't have any experiences as a kid where I was like, like just weird stuff would happen, or like, I don't know. I didn't really have many of those experiences that maybe we would think of or that we see in media or on TV shows and stuff. Like I'm watching Superstore right now. Do you watch Superstore?
Yeah,
I
with
love
Glenn,
man. He's so, I'm like,
as soon as you said it, I knew you were going to be talking about Glenn.
I don't know anybody like Glenn. I never knew. I wish I did though, because it would be so awesome. Have you heard that guy's real voice, by the way?
No,
Nothing like that. I'm like, he's going to have some major issues in a couple of years from now because of the amount of times he had to keep his voice really high. Yeah, he's funny. Anyways, yeah. So I didn't know anybody like Glenn that kind of scared me away from the idea of Christianity or faith. But there definitely was the mystery of it, and putting all your eggs in one basket, if I could put it that way, and saying that was a little bit intimidating. It wasn't that I didn't want to get there, but that definitely was intimidating. Of like, okay, how do I know that this is real? How do I know that what you're talking about is actually, something that's true? And even though I'm definitely a really emotional person, something that I've learned about myself over, especially this last year being in lockdown, is that God's given me a brain to think about things really deeply, in a way that I had never done before. But when I look back kind of on my history of faith, there was definitely all these parts that led up to who I know that I am now. And it's that I deeply thought about, why would I believe what I believe? And so when I still see people and Christians just believe because, I go, okay, there is an element of faith that's scriptural that says we got to just trust God, and we have no evidence. But Christianity is not a lack of evidence faith. Like there's nothing about Christianity that says we're just going on a whim here, hoping that it's true.
World's biggest gamble.
Yeah. I actually can't stand. I'm gonna butcher it, but I've heard it lots said before that it's like, well, like if I'm right, it's awesome, and if I'm wrong, well, then I just lived a great moral life. And it's like, actually, our faith is so much deeper than that. There's so much truth to it, and so. From a young age, I kind of went on this discovery of like, okay, if I'm going to believe this, I want to know why I believe it. And on that journey, I found that a good majority of people could never give me a good reason why they believed what they believed, outside of personal testimony, which is obviously actually good. And testimonies used to bring other people into faith and to encourage them. But I found that was a bit of like a red flag. I was like, whoa, most people that are here don't even know why they're here.
Yeah. So what would you say to the believer who's feeling insecure about what you're talking about right now? It's like, if someone were to ask me why I believe what I believe, like, and maybe, I think they maybe have great intentions, kind of like you were saying, like it's genuine. It's not like their faith's invalid,
sure.
or it's not genuine, but they feel like there are a lot of holes in their understanding of everything. And I think that's what intimidates people who want to share their faith, is having to be the person to say, I actually don't know, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. But what would you say to that person? Like how would?
Well, if we look at kind of what's mainstream right now, especially in young adults, like we know as pastors that, and the numbers are only increasing, that 80% plus of students once they graduate high school, they decide to drop their faith at the door. And that shows me, did they actually really believe what they believed to begin with? Because the moment that they were challenged about it, it seemed like it's too many flaws. And that made me think and go, you know what? I think that people that would be in that place, and I was in that place at one point, and sometimes I still find that myself gets into places like that. So the first thing I would say for somebody that is maybe intimidated or struggling with the idea of like, why do I believe what I believe? That's not a bad question. And you wouldn't be alone in asking that question. There's lots of people that want to ask that. I think sometimes what's happened, and I'm a lover of the church. I believe the church is the hope for the world. But I also know that it's not something that we talk about. We don't normally make room for discussions on doubt and questioning. And something that's popular right now is deconstructing your faith, right? You've seen so many like popular, people that were like we were like fans. They were like, and idols isn't the good word, but they were like people we aspired to be like when we grew up. And they were just like, all of them have deconstructed their faith. And I go, why are they deconstructing it?
R.I.P. Marty Sampson.
Man, don't even get me started. But then you see them doing these interviews and or like writing on their Instagram or whatever, putting up posts and stories about, the things that they were questioning. Now, okay, those are really good questions that I actually think every believer needs to ask. The thing is that I believe there's actually answers to them. And we don't always like the answers, by the way. We don't always feel satisfied with the answers, but I actually believe that in many cases, and not all cases, because we're not going to figure out everything in this life, there's actually some really, really solid evidence to the answers, to the questions that we struggle with. And so I would say if someone's sitting there and they're like, well, why do I believe what I believe? You should ask those questions. Here's where the difference comes in. If you're asking it to get closer to Jesus, you're on a really good path. If you're asking it to try and poke a bigger hole in it so you can just feed your own self with the things that you want and your own desires, well, you're going to get what you want.
And our youth pastor, Will Ferguson, shout out Will Ferguson. We were talking about this in that transition of, and I think it's not just relevant to high school students to university. And we were talking about that transition, how to make sure high school students actually transition into the next step and next season of life well. And it was a long conversation, but essentially we came down to, we got to be really careful that we don't make students in love with the culture of church. They need to be in love with the culture of heaven. And that's where I think the line in our own lives, and that's why I think COVID sucked in a lot of ways, and it's terrible. But one of the good things is I think it's disrupted the routine and rhythms of what our faith was. And it's put us in the position to say, well, what am I actually in love with? Right. What am I actually following? What has really captured my heart? Is it still Jesus? Do I still have moments of intimate moments in prayer, in worship, in fellowship with him? Do I still love his word? Do I, and like, there's always a grieving of, we talked about that with Laura. There's the grieving of the gathering. I think that's totally fine. But I think in moments like this, it's a revealer of, okay, well, what was my faith built on? Am I comfortable with what I actually know when I'm not being, not spoon fed, but that constant drip of the routine of faith? And it puts us in a position to ask difficult questions of ourselves and what we've built our faith on. And so I think as people who want to share our faith and people who want to communicate our faith, the enemy, I think, likes to creep in those moments of doubt and say, well, you're obviously not someone who can share your faith. You know what I mean? Like, I think we do need to know what we're talking about, and it's so vital. But I think there's a difference between being critical for the sake of being effective and falling into the trap of what the enemy would say is, well, you have nothing to offer.
Exactly.
And you know nothing. And if you were going to explain to somebody, you can't explain it well enough to be able to even make a difference. And we were talking like, as the train of thought between the world and the church widens, you know what I mean? Like, it's only growing wider that we're not on the same page. This is my own personal feeling. The thing that's going to bridge that gap, and even from your story, it's going to be meaningful, genuine relationships with people.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to be the institution of the church. And not the institution's bad. It's good. It's valuable. It's amazing. And it has its place. But in that moment where someone goes, well, I've heard this about faith, or I've heard that about faith, or I really understand this, and what they do is strange, yada, yada, yada. The thing that will make the difference is, well, you know me and you trust me and I believe this. Would you trust me to come with me and understand it more?
Yeah, I don't think God had ever designed this life to do it on our own or figure it out on our own. So why would we put people in that scenario where it's like, okay, come to this service and leave very confused, and I won't help answer your questions. Like that's a recipe for disaster, right? Like it's got to be more like, hey, like, oh, the pastor just said that. I don't know what that. Oh, where is the book? What's Corinthians? Like, I don't know what that means. Like being able to walk every step with somebody. And here's the thing: you can't, you know, this is like pastoral 101. You can't take somebody where you've never been. And even if you do, you're going to be in the same place. You're going to be learning at the same speed. And that's okay. Like there's no shame in that whatsoever. But I just think that it's time for us to really take a hold of our faith and go, okay, I know why I believe what I believe, because A, B, and C, and whatever those things that really just, they speak to your heart, like do your own homework. Laura, who is Mike's brother, we were talking about this the other day. She said, she put this thing on Instagram, and it just like spoke to me. She was like, Canada needs a revival, and it's not going to be a big tent meeting or stuff like we've seen in history. It's going to be a bedroom revival where people are taking their faith seriously and they have no choice but to do it from their bedroom. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. I can't drop this mic. It doesn't work. But yeah. I was like, that was so good. That was so good. So yeah, I think there's three big questions that people ask for themselves when they're wrestling with their faith, which is not a bad thing, by the way. You see that in scripture all the time. And then those three big things are actually connected to the three big questions that people usually have when they're actually thinking about something more than themselves. So the first one is, why are we here? Where did this all come from? And the scripture speaks to that. And there's lots of different views. But there's lots of really good resources to understand the Genesis story, right? So like when you tell your friend, oh yeah, like God created Adam and Eve from a rib and there's a snake and they ate an apple. Okay. Like, is that mytho history? Is that like actually what happened? Does 7 days mean 24 hours times 7? Or is it true that, we've been in here for billions of years now? Like you can actually come to conclusions. And so that big question of where do we come from? The one that I think most people deal with is, why are we here? So the idea of, is my life meaningful? Is there a purpose? And the Bible speaks to that, right? And then the big one, and this is specifically with Christianity, is, did Jesus rise from the dead? Like if you can grasp those three questions and you do your homework, and there's really good resources, and I'll share some.
Recap them with us. What's the first one again? So
like, where did this all come from? So
where
creation,
did it come from?
Right? So that's a big argument that's happening in our world for all of history. It's been argued. The second one that I think most humans care about is, why am I here? So is there a purpose to me waking up every day? Is my life meaningful, or am I just a clump of cells that goes with the rhythm until the grave? I don't think so. I think there's something bigger than that. And Christianity answers both of those questions. Then that third question is specifically within the realm of Christianity. Did Jesus rise from the dead? And that's the big one, because if he didn't rise from the dead, he was just a cool moral teacher, or he was a fool. Because why wouldn't he have just said before he was nailed up on the cross, I'm just kidding, I don't want to go through with this anymore? So there's something deeper about that. And there's lots of really great resources. So those three big questions, I think if you're a young adult watching this right now and you're wrestling with that, why do I believe what I believe? Go and look into these three big questions. Where did this all come from? Why are you here? Did Jesus rise from the dead? And the Bible speaks to all those kinds of things. Anything by C.S. Lewis speaks to all these three things all the time.
Totally.
Some that I've loved this year. One of my friends, John, here in Stratford, got me hooked on apologetics. I've always loved apologetics, but he opened up a can of worms.
And apologetics is essentially how to understand your faith and answer more of these critical questions. That's what apologetics really is.
It's the argument for God's existence. And faith in Christianity. So So some people that you need to look up, and they're not Pentecostals, by the way. So there's some things where I go, and I'm a Christian before I'm a Pentecostal. Let me put it that way first, is I love Jesus before I love Pentecostalism. But these guys have a really great view, and they don't even come from the same background that I practice in per se, or that I'm affiliated with. So anyways, some of these guys, one that I love is Dr. Frank Turek, Turek. Dr. Frank Turek. He's got a ministry called Cross Examined. Super cheesy name, really great stuff. He's got podcasts. He's got a YouTube channel. He's got an Instagram account. Maybe he's on Twitter. I don't have that or use that anymore. But he's got lots of stuff that when you're just going through the feed right now and you're bored out of your mind, stuck at home, put something that's actually healthy in there that's going to feed your soul. So Dr. Frank Turek, Cross Examined. Another one is William Lane Craig, who's probably my favorite. And he's kind of like a notch above Dr. Frank in nerdiness. So Dr. Frank is like the Message version. And then, you have William Lane Craig. He's more like ESV version of like the language that he uses.
Yeah.
And he's got a ministry called Reasonable Faith. And it's so good. Same thing, podcast, YouTube, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. Really, really great resources. And they're not like these 2-hour debates. They're like 5-minute videos of them in universities and all other places too, content that they make, answering these questions that you, the listener, have. They're so good. They've been so refreshing, and they've fed my spirit like a lot this year. I feel so after doing this for years now, I feel so concrete in
Yeah, and I
believe,
think that's
what
a
I
big
believe.
part of it is like our faith should leave us with a confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Like there should be a confidence in our faith. It shouldn't be a secret, and I think sometimes we confuse confidence with being a jerk. That's not really what I mean.
Sure.
But I think there should be an internal confidence of like, no, I'm firm in what I believe. And so I can engage these conversations through the lens of the fruit of the Spirit because I'm confident. You know what I mean? Like it's okay. It's so much easier to have patience and kindness and gentleness and self-control when you don't feel like you're being attacked and when you're confident in what you know.
You're confident because there's good reason to believe it.
Yeah.
Not
like
just because
it's not a
faith.
whim. It's you've actually thought about it, and we've, and for a lot myself is some of the experiences that I've had have helped keep me grounded in my faith. Some of the moments in prayer. Two that I would add is the Ask NT Write Anything podcast. Unbelievable. And the second one's actually called Unbelievable. And it's when he actually he'll pit two perspectives. So he'll have a creationist theory professor and someone who is the evolutionist theory and they'll talk back and forth points at each other and kind of have this healthy kind of debate. And I think really what we want to drill home today is witnessing and sharing our faith is our responsibility. That's our part in the church as a believer. It's not, God's plan was never to establish figureheads in the church that we would bring people to and they would communicate the gospel. It's never what the design and the plan was, but it's everyday people in everyday life sharing their experience with an eternal God that really exploded the church. And of course, there's places for church leadership. Of course, I think we're a little biased that there's definitely a place for church leadership. Like there's obviously there's a point to it, but kind of to your point earlier, like let's not. There's a confidence that every believer can have, and there is a call on every believer in every life to be someone who wants to and is able to share their faith. And you might be at different spots on the spectrum of where you feel comfortable doing that. And I think God's graciousness is for all of us. And whether you feel like you're pro-star, intellectual, you have it all down pat, or whether you're someone new to faith and you're just excited about it, the Holy Spirit uses all of it. And when we're willing and available and we come to relationships in our life with authenticity and love and the expectation that we just want to be available and we're going to share the gospel in moments when we can. And I loved what you were saying about the Bronson family, just taking you in. Like it wasn't like without an agenda, but with a hope. I think that's the difference is there's not an agenda, but of course there's a hope. And that's what God's given all of us.
Yeah. Let me take the weight off too for listeners today. You're not God. You're just you.
What?
So it's not your responsibility to save anybody. In fact, even if you tried your hardest, you don't have the ability to, because you're not perfect. Only God can do that. Like that's the gospel in a nutshell, is that Jesus is the one who saves us. It's not your job to convince anybody. It's your job to share. It's your job to live. It's your job to be there. It's your job to listen. It's not your job to save. So anybody that's listening today and they feel the weight on their shoulders, like, let me take that off for you today and say, hey, you're not God. You're just you. Maybe there's a Kevin watching. Kevin, if you're watching, you're not God. You're just Kevin. I don't know if you have a Kevin.
Poor
in your,
Kevin.
in your group.
Poor
But
Kevin.
He's
Yeah.
like, Pastor Scott, you told him to say my name. But yeah, like, take the weight off. It's not your responsibility to save. It's just your responsibility to live and to share. And sometimes you share by living too. So,
Well, huge thank you to Pastor Carlo for joining us, and so much to take away with. And so plug those resources again, right at the very end. Those, you gave us 2 good names. What were they again?
yeah, Dr. Frank Turek, and his ministry is called Cross Examined. And the other one is William Lane Craig, who is also a doctor, and his resource is called Reasonable Faith. And they're on all the social platforms. So check those out.
Beauty. Thank you so much, Carlo. And for everybody else, back to the cast. Well, huge thank you to Carlo for joining us. I love Carlo, and I'm always challenged by his perspective of, are we willing to see people for what they are, as people who need grace and understanding and patience and love and kindness and goodness. And we'll begin to see people in our life as people we want to actually walk through life with and walk through the journey of faith with. And, that's been a lot of my story of how I came to faith, and how what actually got me to the point to let this be something that's more than just a faith that I inherited, but a faith that I've taken on, are people of incredible patience and persistence and consistency in my life, who allowed me to have moments of questioning and doubt and frustrations and misunderstandings and all of those things. And, I'm just encouraged to think of, in the same way that that's what brought me to faith, I want to do that for somebody else. I want to be consistent in their life. I want the relationship to be genuine and real, and someone that I really care about. And, I think through that, people come to see that our faith is not this token, and it's not just something we're trying to get points on a scoreboard, but they're people's lives that we want to see changed and transformed. And so I wanted to ask our cast tonight as we go, is there someone in your life that doesn't know Jesus yet that you hope will know Jesus?
Yeah, there are a couple people at my work that like I've known for a couple years, and had like those kind of in passing conversations about Jesus. But now it's kind of getting to that point where it's like I want you to like make a decision, and they know I want that, but like I'm not going to push them. But there are a bunch of people that I'm friends with there that I really want to come to know Jesus.
Totally, that's awesome. There's a lot of people I work with too. Sheesh, they are, my goodness. I'm just kidding. What about Aiden or Elliot? What about you guys? And I to put context prefix to this, sometimes this can be a very intimate question. So like if our answers sound vague, I think out of the spirit of them being real people who we care about and we love and we want the best for, it might come across vague, but they're real people that we're talking about. Go for it, Aiden.
I had 2 people in my life that really come to the center of my mind. One's a family member who, grew up in church, but like kind of came to me and was like, I feel like I've just been forced into this. Like, I don't really know if it's for me. And I just don't think a relationship is what I want. And I've had another who is just almost kind of in denial over, like my friend who's in denial, just has grown up into a Christian home too, but just doesn't want, it's almost like kind of like the self has kind of given him desires that he has just wanted to live by.
He's questioning it.
Yeah,
he's like, is this something that was real, or is it something that I inherited? Like that was exactly my situation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you, Elliot?
Definitely, again, another family member for me as well. Again, his experience with church was that, like, he felt that he was forced to believe what we believed, and that if he didn't, he was doing something wrong. And so that has kind of defined what Christianity or what this faith is to him. And so like him and I like have conversations about this all the time, and it's interesting to hear like his perspective as to why he doesn't believe certain things, or he's having trouble with coming to terms with some things that we believe as well. But yeah, like slowly we're going through the Bible, and I think that actually having good representations of what Jesus is in his life has started to kind of shift his perspective on that, which is good. And I mean, that's all I've really wanted, is that I think that we forget that, yeah, it's one thing to, again, preach the gospel as well. But I think, as you were talking about already, there are instances when, not that it's appropriate, but I think that there are moments where it's better to do that than others. And I think that ultimately it just comes down to just be Jesus and love on them regardless of what they believe and where they're at.
Yeah, and a big part of it, and I'm very sympathetic to people who have had bad experiences in church that have caused them to walk away. Like, this is probably an entire separate conversation, but if we're going to have a heart for this evangelism, we should probably be pretty good with our own people and making sure that they're still following Jesus before, like, you know what I mean? Like, if we treat people internally so poorly that they walk away from faith, why would we expect that people who do not know Jesus yet would choose to necessarily follow him based on our interaction with them? And, you know, there are moments where the Spirit can meet someone in a moment of their life apart from any of us and radically transform someone's life. Saul to Paul. Like, there are moments like that, but it doesn't necessarily absolve us from our responsibility. And I think that's what I want to really drill home tonight, is that the future of the church is people who see sharing the gospel as their responsibility.
I was just going to say, kind of along those lines, like, it is, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is like biblical that we, not only, like, once we accept Christ and once we develop a relationship with him, like, are we not called to go and make disciples as well? Or was that just...
Totally we are.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally we are.
So it's
go and be my witness and make
Exactly.
disciples are the two things that we're asked to do.
Yeah.
And they're hard, and we don't always do them really well.
Yeah.
And
maybe some Christians just, like, I feel like they don't, they kind of, maybe it gets forgotten about that part of it. And like the fact that we need to be active in, like, sharing our faith. And maybe that's another reason why they're not maybe scared to do it, or they just kind of forget about it.
Well, and the challenge is we are at moments victims of our own culture.
Yeah.
And we were saying earlier before we were recording, like, Canadian culture is not as community oriented as I think we'd like to think it is. Like, people come home at the end of the day, they get in their house, they mind their own business, they find people who are somewhat like them, and maybe not ethnically, but even ideologically, sociologically, all those things. And we kind of stick to our groups. It's not necessarily this community culture as much as other places in the world where the gospel is being able to be demonstrated a lot easier. And so what I think it forces us to do is break our mindset of me first. And that's what I loved about Laura's conversation. I think Laura Fess set it up perfectly to say, look, if you're going to be someone kingdom-minded, you have to be someone who is countercultural, and not countercultural for offensive sake, countercultural for, I'm going to go out of my way to care for this person with nothing in return.
Yeah.
And let it be genuine, and let it be honest.
That's good.
And allow it to be something that sets up an opportunity for God to share something powerful in their life. And so as we go tonight, if there's someone in your life that you've been thinking about and someone that you think needs to know Jesus, that might just be the leading of the Holy Spirit in your heart and your mind to reach out to them. I'm not saying you need to send them NT Wright's Understanding the New Testament. What I am saying, though, is they might need someone to care about them, encourage them, remind them that, you know, there's more to life than this. And as we reach out of a genuine relationship and just spend time with them, trust and pray and ask God to create opportunities to speak truth, life, and goodness. And when the moment comes, would there be a boldness to actually share our life story with them so they come to know Jesus? So awesome to have you at the Young Life. And our question of the week this week is who's the person in your life that you want to come to know Jesus? What do you begin to think about it this week? Who you want to be responsible for to come to know Jesus and we'll post it. You don't have to put their name. You can put brother, sister, coworker, whoever it is. We want to know who is the person in your life that you would love to come to know Jesus. And we will catch you guys next week for episode 13 of the Young Life Podcast. We'll see you guys later.